Good evening everyone and welcome to the last Dangerous Monday. Yes, that's right, the Monday night ride is coming to a close as of today. We're moving to Wednesdays as of next week, so there'll be no Wednesday stream this week, no Monday stream next week, but then we're straight into streaming on Wednesdays as of next week, which is the 25th. But we'll go into that a bit later on. Essentially this is just the intro announcement we're going to make on this, just so that people initially don't get scared away and go, oh no, he's finishing, he's not going to be streaming anymore. That's not the case. I'm hoping that I've been clear enough on social media and so on to say that I am going to be changing to a different night, not stopping this altogether. But there'll be some channel changes hopefully. Not channel changes in the sense of changing from 1 to 3 or anything like that, but just essentially changes in the way it looks and the way it's presented, hopefully, if I get enough time to get all that done by next Wednesday. And a bit of a change in format, we're broadening our horizons a little bit and not just focusing on Elite Dangerous, hence one of the reasons why I'm moving away from Dangerous Monday. So as a last kind of swan song for the stream, which has been kind of going on now for, it must be run a bit on close for 5 years now, 4 or 5 years we've been doing this on a Monday. We're going to finish off with kind of, I consider it to be a bit of a full circle thing. We've got one of the channel and myself's closest friends popping on for a chat about some stuff that's going on with him at the moment. Quite exciting stuff. Those of you who've seen the title of the channel can probably work out who that might be. But he will be on very, very shortly. I'm just hoping, I was just going to give up a little bit of space for people to come on the stream tonight, but surprisingly it's quite quiet. It's just one of those nights where I don't think anybody wants to be on. But yeah, I hope you've all had a good week. It's been a bit of a slow one for me actually. Lots happening at work, not much happening here, because what I've been doing mostly is working on the RPG. Trying to get it reformatted and layout changed for the printer to try and do something a bit more fancy with it. But we'll go into that again later on. So the idea tonight is we're going to have an interview with a special guest star for the first hour or so. Anywhere between sort of half an hour to an hour, depending on how long he can go on for. As a man, I know he can go on for quite a while. That sounded a bit dodgy, didn't it? As a man, why did I say that? As a friend, sorry, that's what I actually meant to say. That's weird. Where the hell did that one come from? But, like our guest last week, John, he may go on a little bit longer. Like a Duracell battery with a pen. So, yeah, maybe I should stop waffling. I just need to do one last little bit of setup, which I'm not going to do right this minute because we're kind of live on stream. I don't want to kind of pop those graphics up while we're trying to do something there. But what I'm going to do at the moment is we're going to pop on a quick intro, and then at the end of that, Serial 8, hi there, welcome to the stream, thank you for saying hi. At least I know somebody's out there. The regulars aren't around tonight for some reason. Maybe they're protesting the prophesied move to Wednesday, I don't know. But usually we've got a Garzini or a Bifford by this point in time, but clearly not. So yeah. We'll go into a quick intro for what we're going to be doing, and then we'll get on to what we're gonna talk about. And there you go. The subject of tonight's conversation is Lords of Midnight. It's a game that people know that I'm kind of into my Elite stuff. Lords of Midnight did for the fantasy gaming genre and the kind of adventure gaming genre what Elite did for space sims. Kind of revolutionised it, gave it a new face, gave it a very sexy depth that games like that I'd never really had before up till that point. And it kind of became a bit of a byword for what the kind of benchmark for adventure games at that point in time. And the reason it's kind of in, I have to thank Good Old Games for that video, by the way. That wasn't my own work. That was shamelessly ripped from Good Old Games because they have a trailer on there for this game. But Real White Wyvern, hello. So what we're doing today is we're having an interview with the author of the first official novel based on Lords of Midnight, Mr. Drew Wagar. Drew, if you want to pop on, we should be able to hear you okay.
Hello Dave, thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. As many of you may know, Drew and I have known each other for a fair long while. So
it is a long time. This is a long time now, isn't it? How many years is that? That's 2005, 2006,
2005, 6, something like that. Yeah,
like that.
Something like that. But yes, far too long anyway. We had far less grey hairs and far younger kids at that point in time. Let's not think about that.
Too long ago.
But welcome at last onto the stream.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. It's brilliant.
We tried this once before, a few months ago, when Elite Dangerous Premonition was due to come out, and the internet broke because it just either couldn't handle the strain or I did something wrong. But all I know is that my internet connection was just not working that night.
We did have trouble, didn't we? Yeah, I do remember that.
The technical demons were there, but tonight we've managed it and we're live. So the intent tonight is to have a bit of a chat about Lord of Midnight, which I believe is coming out rather quickly. So if you want to give us a quick intro about yourself, your experience, what you've done, and what's coming with Lords of Midnight.
Yeah, thank you very much. Drew Wagar, big fan of 80s computer games. Kind of, I think we're probably close to the same age, aren't we? I think I'm a bit older than you, not much.
Yeah, I'm the baby of our group.
So I was I was an early teenager at the time when these computer games were first coming out, and got them kind of first hand. So and Elite and Lords of Midnight were two of the games that really kind of captured the imagination as a teenager playing those early 8-bit computer games, which was just great fun. They stick with you through the years, and you still remember them very, very fondly years and years later. So I've sort of been, I suppose, writing stories ever since then. It was the Dark Wheel, the little novella that came with the original game Elite, that kind of kicked me into writing, because I remember reading it thinking, oh, you can write stories about space, this is awesome. Despite my my English teacher and my parents sort of trying to dissuade me from doing it and spend some time actually doing my O-levels, I still kept doing it throughout all of those years, and then it never really left me, even though when I started work and went to university and all that kind of good stuff. And back in 2006, I think probably when we met, actually, it was the Elite forums, wasn't it? And
it was, yeah.
Elite was a version of Elite that had kind of been remade for modern PCs and stuff like that, but it was kind of paying homage to the original game in terms of its gameplay, but sort of updating the graphics and allowing things to be modded, which was quite cool. And I wrote a story for that game called Status Quo, and I really just wrote it for fun, but I did publish it, not publish it, but kind of made it available online, and everyone seemed to really enjoy it. So we ended up writing quite a few, which were all a little bit tongue-in-cheek and kind of nods to people who remember the original game. But it did get me started on writing, and then looking at it thinking I could probably take this a little bit more seriously, and really from there it kind of just snowballed. So I ended up, as most of you probably know now, with a Kickstarter when Elite Dangerous appeared, and it ended up in a book, and then another book came along, and the Lords of Midnight one was interesting because I bumped into Chris Wilde online totally accidentally, and he's the guy who now looks after the IP for Lords of Midnight, and the issue there is, unfortunately, the original creator of the game, Mike Singleton, died very sadly back in 2012. But Chris Wilde now looks after the IP, and I bumped into him on Twitter, having just spotted kind of a graphic from somewhere, going, "Oh, I remember Lords of Midnight. That was a great game." And in the process of that conversation, we ended up talking about the novel that never happened, which is a bit of a story I'll tell probably later on. I said, "Oh, it'd be great to," I wrote an Elite one. It'd be great to. Write a Lords of Midnight one, and he just sort of enigmatically came back with, "It can be arranged." And the rest was history, really. So 2 years down the line, I've written that book, another book, and I think we're 2 or 3 days away from launching it now. I think it's coming out on Thursday as an ebook, and then the paperback version comes out at Fantasticon in September. So, another sort of 80s classic game that's lent itself well to a book has been turned into a book by me. So I feel very lucky in some ways to have these opportunities to kind of go back and revisit all the cool stuff from when I was a kid. And then but also, I'm kind of also hopefully honing my art of writing books, bit by bit, and enjoying the ride. So it's good. It's been good fun, but it's been a long old haul since the 80s.
Cool. I'm sorry, Drew, but can you just give me 2 seconds here? I've got a bit of a problem.
Of course you can. Oh dear.
Sorry, everybody. I'm going to actually have to go for a couple of minutes. I need to go and check something, so please bear with me. Okay, my apologies there. I'm back. Is everyone else still there?
You okay, fella?
Just had some news that's kind of knocked me for six, so but we'll carry on. Yeah. So anyway, where were we talking? Where did you get to?
I was just still finishing up with just the background on Lords of Midnight. So pick up from where you were. You'll be fine.
Right. So yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a. I was going to say lucky circumstance, but I wouldn't say a lucky circumstance. I think probably the thing I would look at is, in my opinion anyway, because I'm a sycophant, obviously the job that you the job that you did doing the Elite book has obviously brought you to the attention of kind of like a wider audience, and obviously the Elite stuff has kind of fed into your own work, the Shadeword saga, and then from there obviously the Lords of Midnight thing has been picked up from there. So how much crossover in your kind of genres do you think has led into the Lords of Midnight thing becoming a reality, and how different is the approach you take to it?
Yeah, I mean, I am a little bit nervous about Lords of Midnight actually, because sort of hand on heart, because it's the first time I've tried to write a fantasy novel. Everything I've kind of done before this has either been a plain sort of straightforward sort of contemporary novel, or it's been sci-fi. So I know how to write sci-fi my way, if that makes sense. But fantasy is a bit different, because at least with sci-fi you tend to stick to rules very, very closely, and particularly in things like Elite, there's certain things you can and can't do. Whereas with fantasy, it's a little bit more. It's a different way of looking at things, because you've got the impossibilities of the fantasy realm and all that kind of good stuff. But I think what I've always tried to do is I've just tried to, when I was doing the Elite book, and I've done the same thing with Lords of Midnight, when I've tried to write them, I've tried to take myself back to how I was when I originally played them. Those games from the 80s, and trying to capture the sort of essence of the emotions I was feeling at the time. Part of that's nostalgia, but part of it was losing yourself in the world that was there, and trying to identify precisely what it was about that. And in Elite, it was the freedom to explore the universe and all that kind of good stuff, and some of the background of things like Galcop and all the stuff that was in the original game, and the manual that came with it, with all the different types of ships. So all those essences were there. Whereas with Lords of Midnight, it's this sort of, and the word epic is overused nowadays, of course, but back then it did feel like you were playing quite an important game, because it was new, and because it was very different to anything that had come before. There was this sort of sense of grandeur about what you were doing, that in some strange way it mattered what you did when you were playing. That the fate of this land was in your hands, and if you screwed it up, then actually in an odd way it felt like there were consequences to it. Lords of Midnight kind of got into your, kind of got under your skin a bit, like Elite does in some ways. You can't ever kind of leave it behind, because it's part of your childhood. And at the time, I suppose I was reading The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and the Shannara Chronicles and all those sort of classic kind of old school fantasy books. And here was the first game that actually kind of allowed you to almost live that experience in a game, because all the games that had come before it were mostly text-based stuff, whereas this one you could kind of wander through this amazing landscape and have your adventures, and you were fighting evil and so on and so forth, and it's just trying to capture all that. So I suppose I've always tried to go back, what is the essence of the thing that captures it, and it has to be something that really inspires me. I mean, Elite was an easy one, because, and you all know the story of Elite back from 1984. Lords of Midnight is the same sort of era, and it's just, those games had something more than just the mechanics of playing that captured imagination. It's really, really hard to put into words what that actually is, but maybe it's the age I was at the time, maybe it's the fact that school was pretty crappy, and that those sort of things were a refuge from that. Whatever it is, they get into your soul a bit, and I wanted to try and capture that essence and put it back into a book when I was writing for those sort of things. So I did that with Elite, and then obviously the Yeah, the other stuff coming back out is my own Shadewood stuff, where I wanted to write my own story, because the good things about writing in things like Elite and Lords of Midnight is that somebody else has worked out the story for you in terms of all the background. But the bad thing is exactly the same problem, because you can get stuck with the lore of the world that you're in and not be able to do your own thing. So I'm quite pleased I've got the Shadewood saga, because it allows me to do my own thing, create my own universe, as well as sort of write in other people's. So that's a good mix. But yeah, Lords of Midnight is my first fantasy novel, so it'd be interesting to see what people think about that.
So you touched there a little bit on how Chris kind of helped you with the collaboration. I mean, how different was collaborating with him on Lords of Midnight to collaborating with, say, David Braben in the Frontier development for Elite?
Oh, totally different. The difference with Elite is that because Elite Dangerous had come back Elite had come back as Elite Dangerous, then they went through that whole process of the original Kickstarter, and then those writers packs appeared and all that kind of good stuff. And after that all settled down a bit, it was a case of, okay, well, how are we going to generate these books? And well, you were involved in it with a few other folks, weren't you, writing the actual lore guides for Elite Dangerous?
Indeed.
And those were sort of the Bible, really, in the early days for how the universe worked. But David Braben was all over those with a red pen. There's very little that we could do. We could sort of, I suppose, colour in the edges of the drawings where there wasn't much paint, but the framework was set in stone, and anything that David Braben didn't like, he kind of got rid of. And then you couldn't divert away from those things. Now, I remember very early on with the synopsis for Elite Reclamation that I'd come up with what I thought was quite a cool idea, and I sent it in for approval, and it came back kind of no. And when I looked at it, I realised that because I was a fan of the original game, I hadn't really thought about Frontier First Encounters and Frontier Elite 2 at all. And of course, that was a big emphasis of where Elite Dangerous was going to start from. And so what I'd come up with just would not gel with that universe at all. So I kind of had to start almost all over again. So the way of working with Frontier was very much, this is how it is. You will use this to inform your writing, and then hopefully if you've stuck to that reasonably well, then we'll give you approval. So as long as you didn't veer away from the lore guides too much, you were probably okay, but you did have to go through that kind of approval cycle. But it wasn't a case that you were contributing a great deal to the existing lore. It was more a case of I suppose kind of aligning yourself with what kind of David Braben's sort of vision for it was. Whereas with Lords of Midnight, the only lore that we had was basically what was in the original games and what was in the original novellas, which were written back in 1984 by Mike Singleton. And interesting enough, Chris had always had been in touch with Mike Singleton for the previous decade, and had many conversations with him about bits and pieces of the lore of Lords of Midnight, actually with Mike. And many times he reported that he would ask a question of Mike, well, why is this like this, and why is that like that? And Mike would come back with, I've got no idea, I can't remember. Or it would be a case of, well, you figure it out. You come up with much better things than me. So Mike was much more interactive, I think, in that sort of sense, and he'd written those things quite quickly. In some ways, so they didn't have necessarily some of the depth there that you would expect. But what Chris and I therefore did when we had the opportunity to turn this into a book was kind of go back and look at that sort of stuff. And we went through together the process of rationalising where you have an inconsistency in the story, and go, okay, well, that doesn't work that way, but if we change this happens, and that messes something else up. We would basically sit down on a Skype call or an email exchange, and then just try and work it out, bounce ideas off each other, and then write that down. When we came to a conclusion, that became the lore that we were going to use for the book.
Right.
And so we've adapted, not harshly, and not not in big ways, but we have added new stuff in and tweaked things to Lords of Midnight simply to make a book work. Also with the idea of having future books as well. So we want to be able to move on to the other games in the series, and also onto the other games that alas never came to be, but still have the opportunity to write books. But you've got to kind of work that end to end to make sure the lore works. So Chris and I, because that was just sort of a one-to-one conversation, we could just sit down, and whenever we got stuck, we could just have a bit of a brainstorm on what the law problem was, work out a solution, bounce them around at each other, and then when we came to the conclusion that we both liked it, that would become the law. So it was a lot more kind of to and fro then, in terms of contributing to that law environment than Elite, which was more fun, to be honest, because you feel like you're being a bit more creative.
It's almost like opposite ends of the scale, isn't it, really? I mean, your collaboration mode has been far more interactive with Chris than it was with Frontier. But you've also got the thing where, with the Elite books, you were kind of adding onto the top of their lore, but with this, you're following the original lore.
Yeah, so I mean, with Elite, I was very conscious early on because there are big mysteries in Elite going right back to 1984. So there's two obvious ones, the Thargoids and Raxxla, and I made a very conscious decision early on that I wouldn't play with those in my first Elite book at all, because I didn't want to go there. Because I knew it would be incredibly constrictive, and I was convinced that Frontier would be doing that themselves, and that's exactly how it seems to be turning out. So I wanted to write something completely and utterly different and new, but in the universe of Elite Dangerous. That was the intention with Reclamation right at the beginning. So we did that. That was quite good fun. But with Lords of Midnight, a lot of the lore didn't exist. So, for example, we know Midnight has been cursed into an eternal winter for several hundred years. That's the setup of the game, and the only reason for that is because the Spectrum color combinations of blue and white worked really, really well. And that's the reason that the Lords of Midnight is set in winter, because the other color combinations don't work very well. There's little things like that. And when you back away from what's the lore reason for it being into midnight, and then you come up with the reason the landscape's being cursed. But you've got to answer lore questions like, okay, well, how does midnight support massive armies of men wandering around all the time? How do you feed people like that when the land is completely covered in ice all of the time? So you've got to, for the purposes of writing a book, you've got to ask yourself those sort of questions, and then that will lead on to another question, and that will lead on to another question, and eventually you start working out what the actual lore background is. But none of that stuff had been done for Lords of Midnight at all. So whenever we needed to reference something like that, I'd just have to stop writing the book and go, Chris, I'm stuck. How do we explain this one? Why where do these come from, and what's the justification for having those there? And sometimes there would be an answer in sort of the notes that Chris had got from Mike Singleton over the years, but sometimes there wasn't, and we had to kind of look at it and kind of see, okay, well, what would Mike Singleton do here? Because you want to make something that's sympathetic to his vision, but in many places there was just nothing there, and we had to kind of improvise. So we've tried to be as sympathetic as possible to the way he did things, with the end result that we're trying to write a book that he would be proud of. But sometimes you just don't know. There's a blank canvas, and you've got to kind of work something out.
Cool. It's interesting. That's two major genre-breaking games that have now had books written by Drew Wagar that have had lore specified by machine restrictions back in the day.
It's funny, isn't it? Yeah, it is, because you think about the constrictions of those computers. You're talking the Spectrum with, it was a 48k Spectrum, but actually that's only about 30k of usable memory. And inside that, you've got Elite on one hand with, how many planets is it? 8 times 256, isn't it? All with their unique descriptions and the Fibonacci sequence generation, all that kind of good stuff.
It's 2048, by the way, everyone.
2048, there you go. I knew you'd have it. That's 2K, isn't it? 2K planets.
Yeah.
And in Lords of Midnight, what you had is, and they were boasting about it on the packaging, on the back of the original game. This game has got 32,000 views. And you think, your first reaction again is, how the hell can it do that? Because it's only got 30k of memory. And then you've got an entire game in there as well. And Mike had done this very clever landscaping technical mechanism for generating the view for your character. And to do all that and cram it into 30k of machine code programming was amazing, clever stuff. And those games were so innovative in that tiny little space. For people to still be talking about them all these years later, I think is quite remarkable. And oddly enough, and I know I see Mr. Hoggard's online, so he's going to have to forgive me for this, because one of the reasons I think why things like Lords of Midnight and Elite came into existence is actually because the hardware of the machines back then, particularly on the BBC and the Spectrum, wasn't designed for the games of the time. So if you contrast it a little bit with the Commodore 64, the Commodore 64 had a sprite generation hardware in it, and it had really, really good sound capabilities compared to the Spectrum. But the problem with that is that the developers tended to write then for the hardware. So you tended to get games that were sprite heavy, and that reinforced the type of gameplay that you already had. Whereas with the Spectrum and the BBC, all you really had was a fast chip and a screen and nothing else. So you had kind of complete carte blanche, and you had to work around the limitations of the hardware to actually get anything done at all. Whether you were programming Space Invaders, Pac-Man, or something like Lords of Midnight, you had to start from scratch every single time. The Spectrum actually, despite the fact it was really limited from a technical perspective, did foster this amazing innovation. And Lords of Midnight was one of the things that came out of that kind of era.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I mean, it's something I've said for a long, long while, is that the more the hardware has increased and expanded and improved, the less work you have to do to make it do anything. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good. You might have great graphics and great sound and all that kind of stuff, but it's the gameplay and the technical aspects in the background that tend to have a bit more of an impact on how the game works.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
Yeah, if there's no imagination goes into it, and there's no storytelling ability goes into it, for example, on that sort of game, and you don't do something half decent with that content, then you're going to end up with rubbish games.
Yeah, and I think that's if I'm in my less more pessimistic mood, I think that's the sort of challenge that we have with today's games. And Elite Dangerous is a good example of this. Is you don't have a choice now but to make your games look awesome. You can't get away with subpar graphics. People just will not forgive you. They'll just completely and utterly pan you in any kind of online review if your graphics aren't good, which means you've got to have artists, and you've got to have high polygon counts, and you've got to have terrain meshes, and you've got to have all that stuff before you've even thought of doing a game. Now I wonder, and I'm sure it wouldn't sell, but the idea always keeps popping back to me, is if you could take something like, let's say, Frontier Elite 2, just those really primitive filled vector graphics, and say, right, we're not going to go beyond that. You're going to have to use your imaginations to play this. But let's invest all of our development time in the gameplay and the backstory. What would come out of that sort of effort? I don't know. Yeah, it probably wouldn't work, but that's the sort of emphasis I wonder about sometimes, because it bothers me that you have to spend so much time on the graphics nowadays, and the assets and all the injection of content that's actually graphical and sound, but at the expense of all that innovation that happened on things like the ZX Spectrum and the earlier computers, simply because the computers weren't up to doing anything more graphically. You put all your emphasis on the things that you could innovate on.
Very true.
I don't know.
There's, up until recently, I'd have said that was 100% accurate, but there's been a couple of games that have come out recently, one of which was an April Fool's joke by a game developer, which have had very, very basic assets, but have concentrated on just gameplay and having fun. And I can't think what the game's called now.
Mr. Hoggard's dropping a few suggestions in the chat.
Yeah. There are quite a lot of kind of minimalistic, simplistic games. I mean, This War Is Mine is one option. It's not a particularly graphics intensive game, but it is a very engaging storyline.
Yeah.
I want to say PUBG, but it's not PUBG. It's a very similar sort of title. It's a Battlefield Simulator or something like that. Totally accurate Battlefield Simulator, I think, is the main game, but they've done a parody. The same company's done a parody game of it called something else, which is essentially just very basic assets. I'm sure somebody in the chat can go and have a look and tell me what it is. But it was in the popular press this week as being a game that was brought out as an April Fool's joke parody game. And because of the public reaction they got to it, they've gone back into it and expanded it and released it as a Steam game now, and it's doing very well. And it's kind of proven that there are a very small cadre of people out there who are looking at gameplay rather than prettiness. And I think No Man's Sky, is an example of where that might go, because that's not hugely detailed in its graphic tendencies. It's not as detailed as things like Elite Dangerous, and certainly not Star Citizen are. But it's starting to hit its niche now, because the gameplay aspects that were faulty at first are now being pushed more, and being patched more and working better. But it still has that kind of cartoony look to it, which I think works.
I must admit, I've been playing No Man's Sky quite a bit the last few months, and I've really got into it. In a sense, it's just it is a game you can pick up and drop for half an hour or 10 minutes if you've got a little bit of time. You don't have to have 2-hour gameplay session in order to enjoy it, and be able to do something. So it is quite good at that. And I think if you like that kind of solo, kind of just wander around exploring experience, it's actually pretty good for that.
Yeah. Well, I suppose we should drag it back onto the book again. Because we've slightly diverged.
We got off topic already.
Just a bit. But yeah, so and my question phone has just crashed. There we go. We were looking at that kind of links into it. The content and depth of a game or a book is quite important. So although you've not had much input into the overall story of the game, you've obviously had quite a lot of input into the characters themselves. So can you tell us a little bit about those characters, who they are, what they're like, and how they fit into the story?
I can, yeah. I mean, the interesting thing, obviously, with Lords of Midnight is that if you've played it, you start off with 4 characters under your control, and they are Luxor or Luxor, the Moon Prince, who's kind of the main protagonist, I guess. He has a son called Morkin. There's another chap by the name of Korlef the Fae, and the Fae are a sort of, I suppose, an elf-like race that exist in Midnight alongside the humans. And there is Rothron the Wise, who is kind of your wizard type, although he doesn't actually have magic abilities per se, as sort of described in the game. And that's basically who you start out with, and they all have different abilities. But you don't start out with any armies at all, and you're kind of on the left-hand side of the map, and you've got to kind of go from there. Now, Luxor is a Lord of the Free, so there are basically 3 races in the Lords of Midnight. The Free are effectively the humans. The Fae are the kind of elven race, I suppose, and the Foul are the baddies. So you have Free, Fae, and Foul. Which what Mike Singleton came up with, and those are your kind of your archetypes of the game. So the baddies effectively start in the north, and their intention is to conquer all of Midnight and subdue it. They're trying to kill Luxor, and they're trying to take over one of the citadels in the south. I don't know if you've got the map actually handy. I saw you had it earlier on. So I can point out kind of a couple of locales if you've got that.
It'll come up in a couple of seconds.
It'll pop up on the stream. So those are the basic characters. Here we go. Here's the map. So you actually start at the Tower of the Moon, which is over there on the left in the middle, and the bad guys come down from the north, and the place that you are attempting to defend ultimately is just off the bottom of the screen there on the bottom right, the Citadel of Zajikith. And if that falls or Luxor dies, then your game is effectively over. You've lost. So that's the win condition for the bad guy. By contrast, what you've got to do is one of 2 things. You have got to defeat Doomdark, who's the evil guy, in battle, by subduing his armies and taking over his citadel, which is far to the north, or you can destroy the heart of his power, which is a magical device called the Ice Crown. And the Ice Crown is a particularly interesting gameplay dynamic actually in the original game, because what it does is it allows the computer to either put a kind of general fear across the entire map, which effectively makes your guys slightly more cowardly depending on how strong it is, or the computer can concentrate that ice sphere in a particular spot and render somebody completely and utterly terrified, in which case they can't move. So what it does and how strong the ice sphere is depends on what you're doing in the game. So if you start losing, the ice sphere starts to get stronger, and it kind of begins to invalidate some of your troops. So if you start to lose, you generally end up losing even faster because the ice sphere is kind of getting more and more pervasive. So it's quite a clever little gameplay dynamic, that one. And that's basically what you've got to do. Now the problem is, because you haven't got any armies to start with, what you've got to do is you've got to race around the map at the beginning of the game to the various citadels and keeps and try and recruit the Lords of Midnight onto your side. And only by doing that do you gain control of an army, and then you can move them around and hopefully intercept the bad guys who are moving around the map trying to obviously take over your places. And if you don't recruit enough people in enough time, then you'll basically get overwhelmed and you'll lose. So the story basically is that the enemy is invading from the north, taking over the land of Midnight, and then attempting to subdue it and take over the entire place, and you've got to try and stop them.
Okay.
In terms of the characters themselves, so Luxor is sort of in the game he's sort of your Aragorn, son of Arathorn type, really. He's kind of not sure of his heritage, and that kind of gets revealed to him during the story. Morkin is his son. Now, Morkin is slightly unusual in the sense that he's a half human, half Fey son. Luxor had an interesting liaison with a Fey lady, which is alluded to in the prologue of the book, actually. And so Morkin has this unique heritage, which happens just so because of the magic of Midnight to make him immune from the ice sphere, which obviously is something that comes in quite handy during the story. Corleth is a Fey and Rothron is a Wise. Now the Wise are quite interesting as well because they're sort of, I suppose, wizards by another name. But in the land of Midnight, all the other wizards that exist other than one have holed themselves up in their towers and will not interact with the world of men at all. And there are reasons for that that get revealed in the story. So there's quite a few bits and pieces like that you you get to understand as you play the game and as you read the book.
Is it in first person or third person?
It's a third person book. Yeah, virtually everything I write is third person. I must admit, I'm not a fan of first person writing. I've done it occasionally, but it's not something I feel very comfortable doing. And usually my stories, and this one's no different, have quite a lot of different characters. So it's quite hard to do that in first person because you need to have sort of a narrator that was wandering around with everybody. So no, I always write them in third person. I find that works better for me. It's more comfortable to write.
Okay. Well, a couple of questions have come in on the chat. I don't know if you've seen them, but I'm going to flip them round because I think Daddy Hoggy's question kind of fits more into what we were just talking about. Why is Midnight called Midnight?
That is a very good question. I don't think I know the answer to that, actually, off the top of my head. I know it was going to be called the Lords of Atlantis and it was originally going to be set underwater, and for whatever reason they kind of abandoned that, or Mike Singleton abandoned that. But where he came from Midnight, I'm not really sure, because there isn't really a darkness theme or a time theme running through the story. There are various lands that compose up this this magical realm. Midnight is this one, and there's the Ice Mark to the northeast, and there's the Blood March to the southeast, I think, if I'm getting that correct. But as to why Midnight is called Midnight, I must admit I don't know. I will go and ask Chris Wilde and report back.
It just sounded cool.
It just sounded cool. It did, yeah.
Okay, and Serial 8 asks, the only other games at around the time probably as inspiring as this were Starflight and the Ultima series. Have you ever thought about writing in those universes?
I haven't, no. But my problem is that it would have had to have been a game that I played back kind of in that sort of formative time. And both of those were a little bit later on for me. And I didn't play them as a youngster. I only came across them much later, and I kind of played them as an adult. So they didn't have that, I suppose, same sort of formative experience. I think I would struggle to be good at writing for them, if that makes sense. I probably could do it, but they don't hold the same inspiration for me, and I need that sort of stuff to kind of push beyond to doing things. So I did actually write a blog about this a few years ago, saying something along the lines of why Elite is the only game I'm ever going to write a novel for.
That was a lie.
And it was a lie, yeah. But I did, fortunately, in that blog, leave myself a get-out clause by saying, "Oh, the only other one I'd consider is Lords of Midnight." But it was a bit of a throwaway comment. I was so glad I actually put that in because it it did turn out to be true. But I can't really think of anything else now that's on my list of games. The only exception to that, actually, if I ever had the opportunity to do Homeworld, I would do that. Because that game from the early 90s, I think it was when it first came out, that one really kind of got me sucked into the story again, and that would be a story I would love to write as well. So if the opportunity came up to do Homeworld, I would almost certainly try and jump at that too. But that's probably it, to be honest. I would say I do really want to get on with my own books. I keep getting delayed by these really, really cool opportunities, but I really must get back onto Shaybirth and get that stuff sorted.
Yes, you must. Okay then. We've got, unless anybody's got any more questions, I think we're kind of at the end of the Lords of Midnight part of this conversation. So when is it coming out? In what formats? And how can we get it?
So it's on pre-order on Amazon right now. So if you want to be kind of first in the queue, you can pre-order it on Amazon. That's the usual kind of Kindle version. So it would be DRM'd. It will be available in kind of open ebook formats from the publisher's website. So that's Dan Grubb's fantasticbookspublishing.com on the same date. So the launch is on Thursday this week. So if you want a kind of non-DRM version, EPUB, that sort of stuff, you can get it from Dan's site. And then after that, we're going to have a little bit of wait while the paperback versions come along on stream, and that will be first available at Fantasticon this year, which I think is the 1st and 2nd of September.
It is.
So I'll probably be doing a reading of that. That's right, there we go, 1st and 2nd of September. So that's when the paperback versions will be available.
Cool. I think Cyril is wanting to ask one more question, so I'm just going to wait for him to type it out. And then we'll carry on.
Yeah, that's right. No worries.
No rush, Cyril. Hurry up. Daddy Hoggy, Homeworld made me cry when the ships jumped back and they'd all been killed. Aww.
It did. That was. It's got that lovely piece of. What piece of music is that? That's the Barber's Adagio for strings in the choral version. That is that is an amazing piece of gameplay moment. I remember when I was playing that game late at night when that moment happened to be, and you, like I say, you come back and your whole planet's been nuked from orbit, and all you've done is accidentally triggered a hyperdrive, which happens to be kind of against the rules of exile that you signed 1,000 years before that you didn't know about, and basically you're triggering your hyperspace drive has basically wiped out your planet. And it's as a moment of theatre in a game, it was fabulous. It's one of the most memorable gaming moments I think I've ever had, that particular one. Just think, oh my god, they've wiped out the planet. What? You really do get choked up about it. It was quite a moment. Yeah, I do remember thinking that was just wow. And I say Homeworld would be a story I would love to write.
Okay. Alright, Cyril's question is, as an author who has some gaming related novels under his belt, is it hard to approach the gaming industry in general to get a license? The way Edie did it must be an exception.
I think it probably almost certainly was an exception. I
think it was unique, completely unique.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? I mean, Elite Dangerous came back as a Kickstarter. And I know Star Citizen was doing... Was Star Citizen just in front of Elite? I can't remember now.
Star Citizen was the first one to do a Kickstarter in the world. Yeah. But it was obviously US based.
Yeah, so and then Elite Dangerous, and obviously the Writers' Packs. Now, I don't know if those Writers' Packs were planned right from day one. I've got this little thought in the back of my head, and this might be just me kind of self-aggrandizing myself a little bit, but I'd sent an email to David Braben as that Kickstarter kicked off, saying, oh, by the way, I wrote some fan fiction stuff years ago and would love the opportunity to write a book for Elite. And I didn't get a response to that email, but the next day the Writers' Packs appeared. Now, I don't know if that was a coincidence or whether or not it was, maybe we can, let's see if these guys are serious and whether they'll stump up some cash. I don't know. I'd like to think maybe I had a hand in making those pledges appear, but it's I have asked the question and the answer was no comment. So I don't know. I never will. So that was quite funny. But that's definitely atypical, and I've never actually approached any major games company to say, can I write a novel for you? Because I suppose I'm very selective in the sort of stuff I want to write. There's nothing about a modern game I can think of that would inspire me to write a book for it. And I know there are things like the Halo series, and there's the Star Trek stuff and Star Wars, and I like those. I enjoy playing those things, but they don't appeal to me in terms of writing a book for them at all. I'd have to be really excited about something to want to do that. But in general terms, if you're going to approach that, I don't know what advice to give you, to be honest. I mean, they may have a way for you to contact them. I think you'd probably have to have some writing credentials to even stand a chance. You'd have to have some published books to point at and go, look, I've done this already, they're popular, can we work together potentially? And it's also, I suppose, in a little bit in the way that, back in the early days with Elite Dangerous, the books were quite a big and new thing. Now, I think the focus is off Elite a little bit, back onto things like Jurassic World and what else they're coming up with in the next IP. You have to be at the right time for a book to make sense for that game, whether it's part of the promotion or whether it's part of the kind of environment of the book. I don't know. So it's a funny business writing a book for a game. If you want to talk about writing game content for a game, that's a very different kettle of fish again. And I must admit, I've written a few, not too many to be honest. I've written a few missions and things for Elite Dangerous, and I also did the. If any of you have unlocked the engineer Elvira Martuk, I wrote most of her dialogue. To be honest, it was really, really hard work to do that sort of stuff for the in-game, because you're so constricted by length, and you're constricted by pronouns, and you're constricted by all sorts of things that you can't improvise on because of the way the game itself is actually written, that it's really, really, really hard to be creative. I found it really difficult. I kind of almost dreaded having to do another mission, because it was very much a case of, you have to... you are in insert system location. You are able to insert n numbers of cargo units in order to get to secondary location. It's that sort of stuff, and it's actually quite hard work. So I didn't actually enjoy writing those things very much. I did a few of them and then sort of said no thanks, I don't want to do those anymore. So it depends what you want to do, really. And I'd personally, if you like writing and just like writing, I would recommend doing your own thing rather than necessarily trying to approach a game company unless that's specifically what you want to do. Because and I think the Elite Dangerous stuff was an exception. It was an opportunity that sort of came up at the time, and it's not quite the same now as it was then.
I get the very strong feeling that when Frontier did release those writers packs, they were kind of under the impression they would get quite a lot of attention from proper writers and proper publishers, professional writers, professional publishers, that kind of thing.
I think that's why they set the bar at $4,500, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Back on the Pledge Awards.
I get that feeling.
To sort of discourage anybody just from turning up. And if anything, interesting enough, when I came up with, lots of people give me the credit for this, but it wasn't me who came up with the Kickstarter to fund the Kickstarter idea. Somebody else did that before me. Was it Boz or something like that? I can't remember his chap's name. Really, really early on the Kickstarter. But for whatever reason, my one actually kind of gained traction to start with. But the only reason for that, of course, is I didn't have $4,500 lying around, so I could just sort of chuck at David Braben and go, oh yeah, I'll write a book. But 3 of those writers packs did go to Galantz, who's a very, very well-known sci-fi publisher. But those books didn't really do very well, and I don't know whether that was just the way they were written or how they were promoted or whatever it happened to be. Oddly enough, it was the fan fiction-y type authors like myself who actually made a greater splash with the Elite Dangerous books compared to the traditional publishers. So whether that took people by surprise or whether it was just one of those things at the time. It's kind of a bit of the history of the game now, really.
I think there's been quite a few opinions about it. I think one of the ones that I think certainly Frontier may be kind of thinking about was, just trying to think. A question that Drew's just asked has kind of thrown me off my track there. But No, there's opinion going around that the reason the Gollancz books didn't go well is because everything came out at the same time and kind of saturated the market.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because you would have thought that Gollancz, having the bigger marketing push at the back of them, would have been able to push their books out more and get more attention towards them. But like you say, it wasn't. It was the fan fiction books that got more attention in the popular press and on like things like Amazon. And that's a very interesting thing to see.
Yeah, it was. I mean, my personal view on that one is that the people who came off the Kickstarter were probably fans of the original games to a high degree. There would have been new people on there, but people willing to stump up a bit of cash for the sake of nostalgia or kind of get into that whole thing. I think, and I don't have any facts to back this up, so this is just me speculating, but I think the original Kickstarter people were by and large, the majority certainly would be fans of previous games. And I think a lot of those people were familiar with the kind of the background lore and story, and what we did, I think the fan fiction authors like myself and John Harper and Alan Stroud and all the rest of us, and yourself included, people could almost sort of sense that we were fans. Whereas the Gollancz books were written by people who were not really original Elite players, so they wrote books that were set in the Elite Dangerous universe, but weren't really kind of heart and soul there, if you know what I mean. And I think that showed up. I think when people read them, they kind of appealed. Now, as time has gone on, then that the Elite Dangerous community isn't the same as it was 5 years ago. An awful lot more people have come in now, and that sort of vibe has changed quite a bit. So it's probably different now. I think each of the novels basically just has to stand on its own merit as to whether or not it was a decent book or not. But I certainly think we had an advantage actually back then, because we were people who put ourselves out, and we blogged and we streamed and we twitched, and we went on interviews and all sorts of stuff and talked about our love for the original game. I think people gave us the benefit of the doubt for that.
Yeah, I think they gave us benefit of the doubt to start off with, but I think as it became clear that we had, or that, see, I'm not going to include myself in this because I wrote a very different sort of book. I wrote an RPG rather than a novel, which is a different type of beast. But fans writing a novel, the passion for the story, the background and the lore always comes through in the novel, because you've got the characterization there as well that shows you how much thought the authors put into those characters in that environment. So that's what really ties it together as a book, and I think that's what was missing from a couple of the fan fiction ones, but most definitely all the Gollancz ones, was that connection to the universe and that connection to the genre. Yeah,
and I think those books that we wrote, and I'm sort of referring again to those the original set of fan fiction type authors. I think we threw our heart and soul into those books in a way that the Gollancz people simply couldn't do. They just didn't have that connection to the original source material. And so when I'm looking at Elite Reclamation now, it's a novel that sort of spans the gap between the olden days and the current game. It fits in between Elite Frontier, First Encounters and Elite 2, and it sort of paves the way for Elite Dangerous. And I think a lot of the other books have that sort of same emphasis. Reclamation was written before a lot of the game was out. There were only minor tweaks made to it because of the alpha version of Elite Dangerous, so the bulk of Elite Reclamation was written without actually having seen the game at all. And that sort of actually in some ways was better. Funny sort of way, because your imagination was less constrained and the rules were less clear. Whereas I must admit, when I came to Premonition, it was harder to write in some ways, because the game was the game by that point. It was very much set in stone, and the way things operated were the way things operated. Whereas in Reclamation, I had a little bit more kind of latitude actually, because you could sort of imagine what things were like in a kind of bigger, more imaginative way, I suppose, than the game actually allowed.
Yeah. Cool. Well, again, we've kind of flipped to a different genre, but we're kind of say we're going to kind of stay away from the Elite stuff, because I think between you and I and myself and John and a lot of the people kind of listening to this kind of stuff have covered the Elite fiction quite a lot. So obviously you're on because you're doing Lords of Midnight, and you've been given the opportunity to do Lords of Midnight because, as well as Elite, you have also got your own sci-fi series out there, hard sci-fi series, called The Shadewood Chronicles, or The Shadewood something. I can't remember if you gave it a chronicle type name. Shadewood, anyway.
It's just Shadewood, I call it now. It's easier.
But obviously, do you want to go into that a little bit and give us a little bit of history on that?
Yeah, so I was writing Shadewood actually before the Elite Dangerous Kickstarter came along. I'd actually written about half of the first book when that appeared, and my view at the time before the Elite Dangerous Kickstarter appeared was that I'd written, I think, 4 sort of elite fan fiction-y books which had gone down quite well, and I'd kind of thought to myself, Elite, I didn't think actually back then Elite 4, as we called it, was ever going to happen. I figured that they'd left it too long, so I didn't think it was ever going to occur. How wrong I was. I thought, I've written 4 fan fiction-y books. They're all kind of e-books. They're all online, and people can do stuff. And I thought I've kind of done the Elite thing. And so I sort of left that behind and then started writing my own sci-fi series. And what I wanted to do there was the problem with Elite. The good and the bad about Elite is that the universe is quite well defined, and you know how things work, and the spaceships do this and blah blah blah, and but some of the stories I wanted to write couldn't happen in the Elite universe, and I thought, well, I want to write these particular types of story, and I want to write particular types of stories about particular types of people and the things that they get up to, and I couldn't do that in Elite. And at the time, obviously with the Elite fan fiction, I couldn't really develop it into my own proposition because I couldn't. It wasn't something I could sell because obviously it would be infringing on Frontier IP. So I came up with, I kind of brainstormed all of the things that I didn't like about Elite, if you know what I mean. And those were things like, sometimes having to obey science and sometimes not. So, for example, lasers that you can see in space. Well, that's totally and utterly unrealistic. You can't do that. Lasers aren't visible in space. So if you're going to have lasers, they should work. And you don't have a range limit on lasers. Lasers go on forever in space, and top speeds of spaceships in space. That's not right either. And so all of those things, I thought, if I'm going to write a sci-fi series, it's got to be a proper science fiction series. So it's going to be science fiction in the sense of science and fiction, not in the sense of let's just make something up and put some spaceships in it because that's science fiction. So it wasn't going to be Star Wars, and it wasn't going to be Elite. I wanted to have some realism in there. And everybody who knows me long term knows that I'm, an amateur astronomer. I like my science. I do a lot of kind of reading of sciencey stuff for fun. And I wanted an interesting place I could kind of go to that could potentially actually exist. And I happened to bump into a university lecturer who happens now to have PhD, so he's Dr. David Stevenson, but he was doing a thesis on the habitability of red dwarf systems. And for those of you, quick segue into science, basically a red dwarf is a star which is much, much cooler than our sun, very, very long-lived compared to the sun, will last for billions of years, whereas the sun's going to be long gone before the red dwarfs fizzle out. But the problem with red dwarfs is they're much, much cooler. So any planets that you have to be much, much closer in order to be habitable in the same way that the Earth is habitable. And that has some weird effects on the planet in the sense that they tend to end up tidally locked, which means one side of them always faces the sun and the other side's always facing into the dark, which makes for an interesting planet, very, very different to the Earth. And as I started working on this, and I was reading his book, and he's sort of written a factual book. It's not a fiction book about this particular problem. He's gone and modelled weather and landscapes and temperature and radiation and all sorts of good stuff around this. And I was kind of just generally talking with him, and I said, well, yeah, could you live on a planet around a star like this, and what would it be like? And he kind of gave me the sort of technical description of what that would be like. And I thought, that sounds like a fantastic place to set a story. And I had to read around, because the other thing I like to do is try and do stuff that nobody else has done. And when I tried to find a book about, a science fiction story about a civilization that exists on a planet that goes around a star like that, I couldn't actually find one. There are a few, as it turns out, but they're not all that well known. So it was an opportunity to sort of do something that was a bit different to your kind of classic science fiction space battle-y type thing. And the other thing that you've probably noticed in my books over time is I like to play science and religion off against each other, and I thought it would be an interesting irony to have that sort of thing happen on the planet here. And then basically at that point I started sitting there, right, I think I've got to world build this and figure out what's exactly going on. And I had done that for a good few months, and I'd written about, say, a third to the half of the book when suddenly this thing called Elite Dangerous suddenly appeared and completely ruined my plans for the next 2 years. So I did eventually get Shadewood out. So its Emanation was the first of 4, and I'm currently working on book 3. And the premise is basically a civilization that's gone underneath some sort of it's kind of a post-apocalyptic type story where this planet has been settled at some point in the distant past. Stuff has gone wrong, and the civilization that is left is basically quite primitive, but has these strange powers which some on the planet are attributing to religion and kind of god worship, whereas actually what's underpinning everything is sort of a scientific technical capability which they simply don't understand. And if you go back to Arthur C. Clarke's sort of classic any technology that's sufficiently advanced is perceived as magic, it's that sort of idea. So you have the irony that the religion is actually trying to exterminate the people who are working on the science, using a power which is actually underpinned by technology. So there's a few sort of ironies in that sort of thing, but that's the essence, I suppose, of what the Shadewood was about. And it's the nice thing about it for me is it's entirely my own creation. So if it lives and dies on my imagination, really, and if people are enjoying it, that's great, because it's a pure story by me rather than something in somebody else's universe.
Cool. One thing I've noticed from your writing is that you tend, in quite a lot of your books, you have very strong lead female characters. How do you ensure that you're believable and that they're what I'm trying to say, that as a male writer, how do you manage to get the femininity correct in your characters, that kind of stuff?
I must admit I was really worried about that, and in a couple of my earlier books I was kind of like because one of the classic pieces of writing advice is write what you know. And it's actually a really bad piece of advice, because there's a vast majority of things that you can never ever know. And one of them is kind of being the opposite gender to what you are. In that case, you can't. I will never experience what it's like to be a woman and have a life from zero to where I am now. That's an impossibility. So, on the one hand, you can say, you can just stop and go, I will never write a female character of any significance, because how can I possibly get it right? Or you can sort of sit down and go, well, okay, there are certain, there are females around, I can observe them, not in a creepy way. But you can I had a sister when I was growing up.
Put the curtains up.
When I was growing up. Yeah, sorry. That's right. Yeah, I had a sister when I was growing up, and I'm married, and I've had girlfriends and sort of stuff along the way. So you do get an opportunity to if you like, do your research, I suppose, if put it like that. And what I thought is, I'm just going to sit down and try and imagine how a female character would react in the situation, as opposed to a male character, and try and get some sort of back personality and stuff. And the thing that was my sort of litmus test, there's two things I do to kind of ensure I've got it right. Is one, I've got a bunch of female proofreaders who instantly tell me, no, she wouldn't say something like that, you stupid idiot, that's ridiculous. No woman would ever say something like that. So that gives me a chance to go back and edit it and rewrite. And the other one is, I tend to actually quite often draft my characters as kind of almost a sort of androgynous. I don't apply a sexual characteristic to them at all in the early drafts, and I just write them as people, and then I sort of decide, kind of by reading it and getting a feel for it, which one should be female and which one should be male. And that goes the same with kind of lots of other ethnic stuff as well. Sometimes it feels right. I mean, a good example of that is actually Reclamation, whereby certainly quite a long way into the second draft, the characters of Salome and Hassan were actually the other way around. Salome was Hassan and Hassan was Salome for quite a long time until I actually decided to change them, and just because it felt right. And I suppose that's the sort of thing that at the end of the day, a gut instinct just sort of works on those sort of things. So I kind of just went, with that particular one, I was worried about writing female characters early on, but I've become less worried about it now because I've just sort of tried to give my characters as much kind of characterization, I suppose, as possible, and then kind of just try and give them a feminine sort of feel from the sort of things I've observed. And I've never, according to my Facebook page, about just over 1/3 of my followers are female, and about 2/3 of them are male. So I have I've never had a gripe from anybody that I've, my characters are not realistic. The female characters I've written are not realistic. In fact, quite the opposite. That you write really, really realistic characters in either sense. So I don't think you need to be hung up on it. I think a man can write female characters, and I think a woman can write male characters with thing. And I think all you've got to do is you've got to just sit down and observe a little bit and kind of get some of the mannerisms and the insecurities and the pomposity and whatever it is that characterizes that person, and try and just emphasize that aspect of them. That's the sort of thing that I do.
Cool. Well, that's very educational to anyone out there who wants to write women and not actually women.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't be scared about it. It's the same asking, why would can you write this write what you know is a bad piece of writing advice in my sort of opinion, because you can't know. I mean, who knows how to fly a spaceship, for God's sake? I don't.
Yeah. I think it's a good place to start in terms of the motivations behind a story or a character. But I think the actual story itself, you can't constrain yourself that way.
No, that's right. I mean, if I take an example of Kiri, who's a character from my Shadewood series, she's got a very troubled background. She grew up as an orphan. She's sort of been kicked and abused by the world all the way through her childhood, so she trusts no one instinctively. And everything that she has been managed to achieve has quite often been kind of snatched away from her. So she's grown up as a quite a bitter and angry young woman. And yet there is a compassionate side to her which does occasionally come out. But she's also learned to be a very, very good warrior. So her answer to most things is to whack it with a stick. And that's the sort of person she is. Whereas there's another lady character in Shadewood called Zoella, who is far, far more gentle, whose default reaction is to kind of be caring and compassionate to everybody, unless there's a reason obviously not to be. And you can contrast those sort of things quite well. And do I emphasize female characters over male ones? I probably do a bit, to be honest, because I'm trying to, I suppose, the best piece of writing advice I was ever given is write the sort of stories that you want to read. And I like to have stories where the male and the female protagonists or antagonists have kind of equal footing. Still, even in this day and age, still don't find that very often in stories, particularly in the sci-fi kind of in the sci-fi fantasy genre, that you tend to still get quite stereotypical people, and I try and avoid that wherever possible. I deliberately made Salome from Elite Dangerous quite an unpleasant sort of protagonist. She's not, you don't really necessarily warm to her because she's actually quite arrogant and rude.
This is true. She's not likable at all, really.
Yeah, she's not a nice. She's not the sort of person who makes friends. She's arrogant. She's cocksure. She's annoying.
She's imperial.
And she's imperial. So that's how she's brought up. And she's rich and she's posh. So. She was deliberately designed to be like that, so that she wasn't. Ideally, she wasn't the sort of you've got to go and save the princess type kind of character. I was trying to avoid that specifically because that's a bit, that is very cliche.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the last thing about Shadewood then is, where did the inspiration for the story originally come from? The story, not the environment. You've already covered the environment.
Yeah. That's a really good question. There's quite a lot of inspirations there, to be honest. I was very, as a young reader, I was really inspired by Anne McCaffrey's Dragon books. So the idea of having an unusual world that was sort of settled way back in the distant past, and some of that knowledge of the past has been lost and then gets revealed in the books, really appealed to me. So that aspect of Shadewood is kind of pinched, I suppose, from Anne McCaffrey's Dragon stories. The other thing I was very keen to do is I wanted to have a sort of old school kind of rollicking adventure tale with Shadewood. So every single chapter ends on a cliffhanger in Shadewood, and that's fairly common for most of my books, to be honest. But that's sort of just one more chapter type thing. Kind of I get out of the old school adventure books. I'm thinking Journey to the Centre of the Earth, and some of the classics like that. That's sort of what happens in the next episode. Last time on the Shadewood series. That's sort of, and much as I admire some of the clever stuff that people do with writing, I didn't want to introduce a whole bunch of kind of clever academic-y constructs into my books. I deliberately avoid things like flashbacks and parallel viewpoints and those sort of things wherever I can. I just want a chronological story that's fun to read from beginning to end and kind of goes to that. So those are the sort of things that are a priority for me. And then I suppose there were adventures like you probably remember this back from school days. There was the Ulysses 31 and Mysterious Cities of Gold. So some really, really great cartoons actually from back in the 80s, and that sort of mix of mysticism and adventure and technology and exploration and kind of just having an adventure, really, I suppose, was kind of the inspiration behind it. So if you mix all that sort of stuff up and you mix me into it, you get Shadewood.
Good answer. Okay, well, I think I've run out of questions, so unless there's anything that people want to ask in the chat there, and there's only one other thing I've really got to say, and that is if you've got anything that you want to talk about or anything that you want to say on the theme, on the stream, sorry, not theme, or advertise or raise awareness of, then now's your chance. Go for it.
That's my chance. I don't know, really. I mean, Lords of Midnight is coming, so that's the big next one. Shadewood 3 will probably be out hopefully by the end of the year, possibly early next year. So that's kind of what I'm working on. I'm just, hopefully I've always kind of said this. I'm very appreciative of the fans of Elite and everyone who kind of came along with me for the Dangerous Kickstarter and everything since. And there have been some interesting ups and downs, I think, with the work I did with Elite in the last sort of year and a half. But I've learned quite a lot out of that experience, and got a second book out of it, and some of that stuff has been fun. I mean, I want to go and do some other stuff now because I really have done Elite to death from my perspective in terms of the sort of contributions I can. But I very much appreciate the support I've had along the way, and so thanks to everybody who has either bought the books or come up and seen me at conventions or just sort of sent me an email or a tweet or something and just appreciated it. It has been great. And I am committed to continue writing. So if you like my type of stories, there are loads more of them to come. Unfortunately, the day job is the limiting break on how fast I can punch them out. But one of these days, I'll get to retire, and I'll be able to write them even faster. I've got loads more stories I want to actually get across. I've got some ideas for my own sort of space opera that I want to get to. And there's a bunch of other bits and pieces that are coming as well. And the other thing is, I get a lot of questions from folks just about the kind of techniques of writing, I suppose, the art of writing. So, one of the things that obviously you're moving to Wednesday with your stream, so I'm going to hopefully sneak into your slot on Mondays, and I'm going to start up my own stream, which is really going to just be about writing. It's not going to be about games per se, although we'll cover games a little bit. So I'm hoping to be able to make that as interactive as possible. So if you want to learn a little bit about writing. And I say I'm not really a qualified teacher in that regard. I have an O level in English literature, C grade, which is my only academic qualification. But I've kind of been there and done that, I suppose, with books and games and a whole bunch of bits and pieces to do with both. And so, and come out the back with some battle scars of that sort of thing. So there are pitfalls and ups and downs and things. But if you do want to do some writing, whether it's books or whether it's anything else, then I'm hoping that stream will be a place where we can kind of explore that sort of thing together. And I wanted to sort of do it to encourage other people to pick up writing, because it's been a great blessing for me in terms of just being able to express myself. And I know there's a lot of other people out there who say, I kind of get stuck here and I don't know where to go, and how do I start writing, and what have I got to do, and all those sort of questions. And here's your chance to sort of ask somebody who's by no means an expert, but has certainly trodden along those paths a bit. So if you want to find out a little bit more about writing, you want to jump in and ask me any questions about that, then hopefully that stream will be of interest. So so I'll be starting that up, I think, from July the 2nd, so we'll see how it goes.
Cool. That all sounds like fun to me. Okay, well, I think that's about it. I don't have anything else to ask. A couple of questions for you in chat again. First, Cyril again wants to ask, which of your books has sold the best so far?
That is Elite Reclamation is by far the most successful one, but it's being rapidly caught up now by the Shadewood books. I expect the Shadewood ones will overtake it at some point this year in terms of kind of overall sales, and that seems to be down mostly to the fact that it's an ongoing series. Which is sort of quite encouraging to me, because I didn't want to be just the person who wrote Elite books, although that has been great fun. So Elite Reclamation today is in the lead, closely followed by Shadewood 1 at this point in time, and Shadewood 2 is doing quite well as well. Premonition is sort of fourth, I suppose. It's doing quite well, but it hasn't been as popular as the first one. And I think there's quite a few reasons for that, some of which are my fault. Some of which aren't, actually, but that's an interesting place. Yes, that's the order at the moment. But I'm trying to concentrate on my own material. Lords of Midnight's going to be interesting to watch to see how well that one does. But I'm not going to prejudge that one at the moment, because I have no idea. Although it's pre-sold quite well, to be honest. I've been quite impressed by the number of people who prepared to buy it when it hasn't actually come out.
Well, everyone knows it's going to be a quality read when it comes out, and that's just me being a super fan again.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay, then last question we've got in there is Garzini, and I know why he's asked this, because he's very transparent in his reasons behind things. But do you or have you played RPGs to any great degree? Now, I assume it means tabletop ones, but let's include computer ones in there as well for the sake of argument.
I used to be quite a big role player when I was at university. We had the Brighton University Role Playing Society, or BURPS, as it was affectionately known, which was just a good reason to turn up anyway, really. And there was a lot of beer consumed and a lot of RPG. So I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and Hero Quest, those sort of things there. That was for a good 3 years when I was at university. But after that, I sort of fell out of the habit, mostly because of time. And I was a full-time job, and I've never really stopped having a full-time job. And I don't have, outside of the university friends I had back then, I didn't have that many friends who actually played RPGs. So I kind of got out of the habit of it until relatively recently, when I think your Elite Encounters RPG came up. And we started playing that one again, and I played that again at Fantastical, and realised how much fun it was. Although it was a very surreal gaming session, because Kate Russell and I decided to play characters from our books under the influence of quite a lot of alcohol, and the results of that were predictably insane. So I'm not sure if it was a really good test of Elite Encounters, but we had a lot of fun, so that was quite good. So I have played them. We do have a games night actually here with my family and some friends that we kind of do every so often as well, and we play some RPG type games there as well. So, not as much as I would like, but it's a function of time, unfortunately. So it's always a function of time I've got quite a demanding day job, unfortunately. So, and three kids now, and then everything else that's going on, and it doesn't leave you much space for anything else, particularly not long RPG sessions. So, but they are good. I do enjoy them.
Has RPG playing inspired any of the writing you've done?
I suppose the only thing I've kind of taken across, I've never really been a dungeon master type from that perspective. So I prefer to play an RPG rather than run one, because I like to act out and be a character. The only thing I have taken away from RPGs in terms of the books is the character generation stuff. And whilst I don't kind of roll the characters up for my books in the classic kind of sense, the idea of having character traits and things for people, and making sure they're consistent throughout and that they act in the same way, is something I've taken out of RPGs, I think. So if I showed you Reclamation or Shadewood, there is a sort of 25-30k background document which describes all the people in those stories. It's very, very structured. I do a lot of planning as a result for my books, which I think shows in the way that the plots and hopefully everything else comes together in the characters. So that sort of making sure the detail behind the thing is correct, I suppose I have taken from RPGs. Yeah.
Cool. I'm just pointing out to Surreal that she's he or she, I honestly don't know. Sorry. That's a very androgynous name, Surreal. It's like Ariel makes me think it's a girl's name. I don't know.
It's quite surreal, isn't it?
It's very surreal.
But sorry.
8 times more surreal than normal, probably. Sorry. Surreal is a chap. I do apologise. I didn't see his winky there. Thank God. Just mentioning that recommending you should have a look at Roll20, which is an online role-playing tool. It's not as I tried to kind of point out on the chat, it's a supplemental piece of equipment that you would use in an online RPG session rather than something that stands on its own right. You can host games on there. It basically gives you a shared environment where you can share chat, video, text, dice rolling, all that kind of stuff. So it's a fairly useful thing. So if you want, for example, if you felt like taking your evening gaming nights online, like if people couldn't make it round, or if you ended up having problems communicating in some way, then it does facilitate that quite well. It's a very useful tool. We use it on the Elite Encounters game on a Sunday afternoon. So if you check out, if anybody who wants to have a look at it and see what it is, including yourself, Drew, just check out the Elite Encounters videos on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/Selezen. And you see how it works. It's pretty cool. It's been quite well done, but it's not as easily expandable as it could be. It's difficult to try and transfer games to a different person, so you can run them like with multiple GMs, or if the GM's not there, you can have someone else step in. It's difficult to do that because you have to have set up the account. So in some ways, it's quite limiting. But yeah, there's quite a few of them out there. My favourite one at the minute, if I can get the assets created for it, is Tabletop Simulator, which is a virtual reality or fully 3D representation of a gaming room, which you can design to your own specification. The only thing missing from it is the ability to have a book on there, but you can have like a PDF, so you can emulate a tablet on the table with the PDF of your file on there, which is one way you could do it. But you can create things like card sets and character sheets and so on, but it's difficult to write on them. So it's another tool that's almost there, but not quite designed for RPGs as such. It's more designed for card games and that kind of thing, or board games.
Yeah, so it's worth checking out. Yeah. The other thing I want to get working, because we've got enough computers in the house now because of all the second-hand stuff that comes along, is I want to get the Artemis stuff running.
Oh, yeah.
So we can all go flying around in spaceships again. So that's quite good fun as well as a team. So I must work on that.
Well, one thing that a lot of us have got to try at some point is Star Trek Bridge Crew.
Yes, definitely.
I can play it in VR because I've got the kit for it, but you can play it in 2D as well on a screen. Okay. So it might be quite fun for you, myself, and John to get together and have a Drinkling Star Trek session.
Hey, yes, I should look forward to something like that.
Yeah, having an Artemis kit set up would be quite a lot of fun, I think.
Well, Artemis is not too heavy on the computing power, so I understand. So
it's not. Definitely.
If you've got bits of old kit lying around, you might be able to repurpose it to make an Artemis system.
Interesting. Anyway, okay, so we've come to kind of the end of the interview there, Drew. So thank you very much. Again,
Thank you very
much like we did with John, we've run an hour and a half rather than the planned hour.
Yay.
Because we
Nothing
can
like
talk.
plans, eh?
This is nothing like planned. So thank you very much for popping on, and very good luck with Lords of Midnight. I'm very much looking forward to getting my copy, and I'm not getting through my book quickly enough to actually be able to read it from day one, but never mind. My voice is starting to go now as well. Help.
No, it's been a great pleasure, sir, as always. So thank you very much for inviting me along the stream. It's always a pleasure.
Cool. And we shall do this again at some point in the future, no doubt.
We shall
again.
indeed.
Tune in. Not next Monday, but the Monday after. Are you going to go off at the same time as I've been doing on a Monday? Are you literally going to steal my slot?
I'm going from 8 to 9 to start with. I'm going to try and keep it sort of short and punchy from the July the 2nd. I need to be 8. I can't do it any earlier because I sometimes don't get home from work until 7:30. So that gives me time to kind of get upstairs and get the computer fired up. So yeah, Mondays from 8 p.m. in the UK. That is, of course.
Right. Okay. Well, I shall draw it to a close there. Good luck with that, and I shall certainly be watching for the first night. Can't think of anything else. I'll say what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a 5-minute break while I oh, thank you for the follow, Suriel. You're a lovely girl. I mean, oh dear me. I'll get me coat. I'm going to have a break for a couple of minutes while I swap around some of the streaming stuff. But what I'm going to say is, if anyone, the intent is for the last half hour to an hour, I'm going to play some Elite Dangerous. But I also have other games. If anybody on stream has any preferences for something else to play, I'm going to put a list on screen of what I have. And if you feel like suggesting something different, then feel free. Otherwise, we'll be going into Elite Dangerous shortly. So thank you very much to Drew. I shall hang up the Skype call for you now.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure, and see you soon.
Take care of yourself. So, a lovely man has now gone. Right, as I said, I'm going to take a 5-minute or so, 2-minute break, 5-minute break, something like that, just to catch up on what's been going on off the stream. Have a comfort break, get up and stretch around. Subnautica, Daddy Hockey. But yeah, so just trying to find my pause screen now so that I can put that up there. I'm not going to put the pause screen up, I'm just going to mute. So yeah, I'll be back in a few minutes. Take care of yourselves. I'm back. Okay, so you've all had a good look at that screen. I'm not seeing particularly many suggestions in there. I think Daddy Huggy said subaquatic, which I think he means Subnautica. If anybody has any preferences on there as to what you want to have a look at, then by all means chuck it in the chat and we'll have a look. If not, then I'm going to boot up. Well, I've got one vote for Subnautica and one vote for Elite Dangerous, which is obviously what the original plan was in the first place. So we'll see where we go from here. But I quite enjoyed that that off-the-cuff interview with Mr. Wagar there. Rather enjoyable. I hope he enjoyed it as well. Have I actually signed out of Skype now? Subaquatic. That's 2 votes for Subnautica and 3 votes for Subnautica. Okay. Well, I got killed last week when I was playing it, so let's do it. Let's do that again. Let's get killed again. So I'm just going to finish my drink off before I put my headset on, because this is a 3D game, a VR game. I wish that was a beer. Okay, right, so this is where I have to get my chat client onto the phone, because I won't be able to see anything other than the phone. Broadcasting. Twitch. Come on. Click on my little thing. You are. Stream chat. There you go. Well, it's the last Dangerous Monday, so I was kind of thinking it would go for some Elite Dangerous, but to be honest, it's the viewers that I do this for. Oh, that's a point. Do I have time for that? It's a 4-minute thing. Do you know what? No, we're running on a bit late. I did have a thing on someone's video today that was going to play. Did you download alien items before Drew pulled the link? Because I've forgotten the link on the One Watcher site. Now points to nothing. Oh God, I don't know. I don't know if I did or not. I'll be honest. Setting up Subnautica to play, it takes a lot less effort than Elite Dangerous. There's not as many applications to start up and get running. So I'm just going to start up Steam. I'm going to change my audio settings back to Rift Audio headphones. And change my main audio to Rift Audio headphones. I'm going to put my music on like I normally do. I'm going to change that to Rift Audio headphones. So you guys should now have you guys should now have some music coming through there as well. Interesting. That game I was talking about earlier, the one that was a kind of cheap parody remake of things like the oh God. Oh God, the name's gone now. Totally Accurate Battlegrounds is Totally Accurate Battle System is what it was called. Essentially a parody game that I was talking about earlier. Totally Accurate Battlegrounds. It's $3.99 on Steam. And it's essentially a low poly, fun parody game of things like the Battle Royale type thing that you can get, like PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds and that type of thing in Fortnite, that kind of stuff. It does look a lot of fun, and it's getting some good reviews. It's getting mostly positive reviews on Steam, so it's very worth grabbing hold of if you can. Right, so I need to now start up Steam VR and the Oculus app. Now all the applications on Oculus should still be on. Into the library, to the games list. Just make sure that I'm on the right thing. In OBS, which I am. Go to Window Capture 3. Let's just check that our headset is working. Devices. We are connected. Just grab one of the handsets so that I can recenter my vision if I need to. There we go. Okay, so all the Steam shit is on. Minimize that. And Subnautica. Playing VR. Actually, that music's quite good, so I'm not going to bother with the other music. Oh, why is it over there? Will you just get me back into the game? don't know what the controls are. Keyboard, wizard, mouse. Shall we start from scratch or we'll go back to where we were? Let's start where we were. Oh. So I get that inordinately long loading screen time at the minute, isn't it? Of course. Because I can see a screen, you can't. Which isn't fair on you guys. And thank you for the follow, the Real White Wyvern. Very much appreciated, sir. Or lady, I don't know these days, it could be anything. Thanks to you guys and your ambiguous usernames. Grrr. I'm hungry. Why am I hungry? Because I've not done any really... Actually, I had tea this evening, and it wasn't that great. Oh, one thing I should do. I did say I would try and kind of explain this. Oh, what the hell? That was fun. Oh, I'm carrying a locker of some description. The slight interruption I had at the start of Drew's interview earlier on was prompted by my wife being rather upset. Reason for that... Is this mouse not working? No, it only ever really span, it didn't pan up and down, did it? My wife had a little bit of bad news. She got a message from one of her close friends, essentially saying that she'd just been diagnosed with terminal cancer. So she was a little upset, so I had to go and kind of let her know that, you know, just say hello and stuff. It's very enjoyable after work again tomorrow. I've been writing on my own to do. My promise was keeping miles to go before I sleep. That's great. Thank you for being on there, Suriel, and thank you for the follow. It's great having you around. Thank you very much indeed. My Twitch chat has now disconnected for some reason. Is that saying I'm not live? No, I am live. Right, there we go. We're back. Okay, so where was I? Just go up there and have a look. Now what I'm needing to make is a radiation suit. Because I want to go over to that ship and plunder it and see what there's lying around. Let's have a look at that. So fibre mesh and lead. To make fibre mesh, I need grapevine samples. Okay. And lead. Where the hell am I going to get lead? Huh. Lead. I can go get more creepvine mesh. But I might have some. Have a look in there. Did I get any more creepvine? No. Oh, it's pig and dark. Creepvine seed cluster. So what I need to go do is go to the creepvines and cut off a sample with my knife. Oh, hang on. Fucking hell! Jesus! What the fuck? That was pants-wettingly scary. Jesus, where the fuck did that come from? Holy crap, that was actually scared the shit out of me. Wow! There's a little shit actually followed me back. Now this is my first game that I played. So I had a tutorial game of this before I played it on stream. So this is the one where I don't actually have the hunger and thirst thing turned on, which is why the map's slightly different. I don't really want to do that again because I'm now shitting myself. Well, I actually kept the sample. So I don't need to go and faff out there. They're not going to get light anytime soon. Thanks, Daddy Hoggy. Right, I'm going to get in here and get him as quick as I can. Why are they all going dark when I get near him? Right, run away! Run away! It's coming for me! Nah! Up yours. Yay. I'll have that. I'll have that. Okay, lead. Where the hell do we get lead? I'm going to assume I'm going to have to get it from somewhere deep. Or can I get it off the ship? But I need the radiation suit to get to the ship. And the ship to get to the radiation suit. Where can I find lead? Should I go to that life pod 3? Will I die?
Huh?
I wonder if that's a graphic glitch. There's been quite a few graphics glitches. Where's my signal gone? There it is. Oh, that doesn't look good. That also doesn't sound good.
Integrating new PDA data. New blueprint acquired.
No lead. Ugh. Go away. Leave me alone. I'll plunder everything I can from here then. Okay. Go that way. Always a bigger fish. Oh no, 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 no. Go away. Lost my pod. Oh, there it is. Thought I was going to die alone. So where do I get lead from then? Can't say they just lying around in the water because it would be poisonous. Wreckage would be the only thing I could think you could really get it from.
Oxygen.
Yeah, this hasn't started up particularly well. It's got quite glitchy. Wasn't glitchy as this last time. The draw distance was a lot better as well.
Two of us?
Your regular sea glide tows a mass of 80 kilograms at over 30 kilometers an hour. The power cellar rig to this one should double that.
You think there's something out there that's faster?
Oh, sure. And that's assuming it doesn't overload 3 meters from the life pod.
You're calm about this?
I'm seeing the engineering problem. If I stop seeing the maths, I'll be terrified.
Well, thanks for that, Mr. Hoggy. So I've got to find sandstone outcrops again.
This is Avery Quinn of Trading Ship Sunbeam. Aurora, do you read? Over? Nothing but vacuum. These Altera ships. They run low on engine grease, send an SOS, you offer to help, they don't pick up. Aurora, I'm out on the far side of the system. It's gonna take more than a week to reach your position. Do you still need
Why
our
am I rocking
assistance?
back and
Over.
forward?
I'll try them again tomorrow. Damn charter's gonna have us blowing our credits running errands for Altera. See what the long-range scans pick up in the meantime.
Come in! That's why it's rocking back and forward. I have an unscheduled visitor. Come on then. Come on. Yeah, run, bitch. See, they all hung out by that kelp thing. Gotta try and get into the kelp thing. That's felt. Don't come after me, I'm just invisible. Just flopping along. Not doing anything. Nobody here to see, nothing here but us chickens. Oh God.
Seconds.
Pathfinder tool, eh? Interesting. Got 1 copper, I need 2 copper. Oh! Do I have the scanner? No, I don't. I haven't made the scanner yet in this one. Where's the battery gone? There it is. Acid mushroom, copper ore.
The scanner can be used to synthesize blueprints from salvage technology and to record alien biological data. New creature discovered.
I should be able to eat this and get health back, but that might be in only the version where you can actually eat the fish and actually need food. Fly, be free!
Self-scan complete. Vital signs normal. Continuing to monitor. Silver-based wiring kits are an essential component of many habitat modules. Be advised, a common complication for cave divers is loss of orientation, followed by eventual asphyxiation. 30 seconds.
Gold, titanium, lead. Right. That way. Oh, I need one more. Bloody hell. Right. Let's do that once more.
30 seconds.
Is that all that's there?
Thirty seconds. Oxygen.
Right, that's what I need. Damn it. Yay! Oh yeah. So, in essence, I can now go across to where the ship is. So I have a radiation suit. But I'm not going while that little bugger's there. I think I am. Tinned fish. Human in a can. Go away! Go away! Go away! Go away! Go on! Run off! Get out of it! Alright. Like that, is it? Yeah, run, bitch. You know you ain't got what it takes, man. Right, so am I gonna go for the ship then? Ow. No, it's already blown up. So it shouldn't be doing anything else dodgy while I'm trying to get to it. Oh wow, this is like completely bad idea. I'm getting a vertigo moment right here. I'm actually feeling a little bit intimidated.
Life form readings in this region are sparse. The Aurora's radioactive fallout will have devastating effects on the alien ecosystem if not contained within the next 24 hours. The day's water ration ahead of time will help ensure against dehydration and eventual death.
Everything's scary as ass at night time. No, I'll go back to my ship. I need to make the little lifeboat, not lifeboat, but the little propeller thing. So there's little... don't know, have the repair tool with me. Okay, I'm going to get back to the thing for now, and I'm going to call it a night there, I think, for the moment. I'm going to get myself some stuff. I'm going to get my repair tool. I'm going to get me try to see how I can make one of those things, the little propeller jetpack thing that I can use to get places quicker, and then I'll see what to do for next time. What did I pick up on the way there? Got more quartz, I've got a wiring kit, I've got a power cell, that's good. I've got my bits and pieces, some copper, that's good, I can make some wire. Got a new blueprint, cooked peeper. Cured peeper, so I can make some food, that's good. And I've got something else, I've got that thing, didn't I? Cyclops Bridge blueprint. Sea glide. That's what I want, is a sea glide, because a sea glide is a little thing that can propel you along quite fast. A new voice log. Oh, that's some of the things. New databank. Done that already. Blueprints, vehicles, Cyclops. Submersible, that's what I need. Okay. Interesting.
This is Sunbeam again. We just picked up a massive debris field at your location. I didn't know how many of you... I didn't know. We're now en route to your location. We're gonna bring you home. Sunbeam out. What else can I say? The only time I parked a rig this big on a rock that small was in VR. And I blew it. It's a bad option, all right, but so are all the others.
So I want the repair tool. That's fine. Okay. Yeah, I get a funny feeling that when I've started this game up, there's been some kind of problem with the load, because there's a lot of glitches in this session. Graphics going the wrong way, things not clipping properly. I've noticed, compared to the VR version, the 2D version seems to be a lot more stable in the graphics department, because there's quite a lot of consistent glitches that I've had as well. I mean, I've played this 3 times now, and each time when I come out of the shell, if you look, there's no floor. there. And when I was watching someone play it in 2D, when we were doing the intro sequence last week, that was sky blue, like the default. But when you were actually watching it in 2D, you actually saw all the explosions and stuff. I want a gun and shoot that bastard. So yeah, so I'm gonna call that a night, I think, and get this mother uploaded. So I don't know what they're for. I'll get some of that stuff out of my inventory. So many pipes. So, not sure what to do with that at the moment. But yeah, so I hope you have enjoyed this session. I am going to come offline now. I'm going to take the headset off, which will blank the screen. I hope that played okay. Oh, dear me. I assume it did because you're all commenting on it. So. This float says in surface you can dive to depths of pipes that use neutral reserves. I don't know, I'll have to look it up. There's quite a lot of stuff in here that I don't know anything about. I'll have to check. But yeah, so I'm going to skip over to the stream intro page. Get rid of media source 3. Nope, get rid of window capture 5. So that was the last Dangerous Monday. Oh, I'm in a lot of pain now. So if you take a look at the I thought you'd enjoy that. I'm just glad I didn't do a girly scream in the process. But yeah, what I'm going to do now is spend the week perhaps doing some new graphics and some new layout stuff for the new Wednesday mode. I haven't thought of a name for it or anything like that, but I'm just hoping it's going to be fun.
Oxygen.
So, anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this session. I'm going to go and finish things off this evening, and then upload the video. So I hope you've had some fun. I hope you've had a great time. I certainly have. I've been Dave Hughes. Have a great week, and I'll see you next Wednesday.